Those figures have just come in.
They've literally just dropped.
606,000.
The size of a small city.
News channels broke into programming. Rishi Sunak rushed to the This Morning sofa.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is live with us here in the studio.
The numbers were lower than the ones the government was trailing, but they are a new record high, fuelled in part by Ukrainian refugees, Hong Kong visas, and the government's own schemes to encourage workers and students to Britain.
Numbers are too high. It's as simple as that, and I want to bring them down.
Successive Tory prime ministers have promised to reduce net migration.
Net migration to this country will be in the order of tens of thousands each year.
David Cameron's promise was explicit, and year after year it was broken. His successor repeated it.
In the tens of thousands.
The pledge broken again.
We will sort out our immigration system.
Boris Johnson gave a manifesto promise to bring net migration down. But after the COVID lockdown, numbers shot back up.
My commitment is to bring numbers down.
A lot of the surge is down to government-stamped work and student visas. And which nationalities are coming here has changed beyond recognition. The European Union for years fed a huge part of the influx, but fell rapidly and is now net negative. The big growth is from non-EU countries, with takers for UK work visas now led by India, Nigeria and Zimbabwe. Many get visas for dependents too.
I really, truly believe it is the great immigration lie that is put to the public at every general election. And I hope the voters will say, OK, well, we'll forgive the past failures. We'll believe them this time.
Last time you got something, yeah?
Lakshmi Jidaraja travelled from India 2 months ago to work in this care home in Suella Braverman's Hampshire constituency. Social care is one of the fastest growing migration sectors, and overseas carers like Lakshmi shop around before emigrating.
Can I bring my child, and whether there is any possibilities for my husband to work here, and all the stuff, everything falls in place here. So it's okay, let's go for this one then.
So if Britain hadn't offered you a dependent visa as well, if you weren't able to bring your husband and your child, and your husband didn't get a work visa, would you have gone to work in another country altogether?
Yeah, sure.
Whereabouts?
Like, might be another European country, or try Canada, Germany, or anything like that.
We do have a lot of cold calls, most certainly, from people overseas, just asking if we have any vacancies, how they can apply.
Cold calling Fareham and saying, can I come and work there?
Yeah, and they've often called multiple homes before they've gotten through to us.
What would happen if the government turned off the tap or tightened it in terms of this labour supply from overseas for your business?
We rely on overseas workers, we rely on for the safety of our residents, really.
Government visa offers to overseas students have massively contributed to the growth in migration. The government announced it was cutting back on student dependents visas this week. Some say it must go further.
This is now happening on a much, much bigger scale. Students are allowed to come, bring their families and work for 2 years after they finish their degrees. Effectively, this is a form of long-term immigration.
That's the offer we have to make to these people if we're going to lure them when Canada's trying to tempt them, Germany's trying to tempt them.
Well, let them go to Canada and Germany. That's absolutely
and let the universities
fine.
go bust.
Oh, the universities may have to decrease in size. Fine.
The numbers that I've inherited are closer to 500,000 plus, and you've seen the numbers today, as you said. But look, my commitment is to bring numbers down.
Experts say Rishi Sunak's pledge on numbers may not require any major policy change. He's saying he will bring down net migration below 500,000 in the medium term. Does that look very realistic to you, if not rather easy, given the trends you spot?
Yes, it does. I think even if nothing changed on the policy side, I think it's reasonably likely that net migration will fall below 500,000 simply because of increasing emigration of international students and the fact that we have fewer people coming in from Ukraine. You know, we've already seen a big drop off in those numbers.
Today's figures show the massive changes post-Brexit in UK migration. Much less change in the political nervousness about discussing it.
So I don't think we can call this mass migration or immigration like a curse, because you guys are get benefits from us, right? Like, you guys get better treatment, better healthcare systems and everything. It's nice.
Gary Gibbon reporting there. Well, earlier I spoke to Damien Green, who was Immigration Minister under David Cameron and Deputy Prime Minister to Theresa May. I began by asking him if he thinks the government policy on immigration has failed or if the government has just been dishonest about the benefits of immigration as a whole.
I don't think either. I mean, there are clearly some special factors behind a net migration figure of more than 600,000, which is clearly too high. It's not sustainable in the long run. Some of them are Ukraine, obviously, Hong Kong, we've offered a lot of visas to. But I wouldn't deny the underlying point is that this level of net immigration is not sustainable, and so the government needs to take some action, some of which it's already taken, to bring it down.
Take back control, as it were. I mean, has the government lost control of this?
No, because we can see why it happens. You lose control if you don't know why things have happened. You don't know what you need to do. It's too high. It needs to be brought down. I'm glad that this week, for example, they have cracked down on what has clearly become a loophole of dependence of students here, where there were 16,000 of them in 2019 and 136,000 last year. That's clearly the sort of exploitation of the system, which happens all the time. Every time you open a new visa route, somebody will find a way to expand and, as I say, exploit it. That's happened. They've cracked down on that. There will be others to come, I've no doubt. But part of the role of the Home Office in this is ceaseless vigilance to see which routes are being exploited and then cracking down on them. But that's only part of the job.
But it's puzzling, isn't it? Because it's non-EU countries that are driving the rise, and that's something that the government has had control of all along, before Brexit and after. It's chosen not to exert that control, which brings me back to my point on honesty. Is it not the case that these levels, or similar, of mass migration holds up the economy?
I think there's a good underlying point there that actually this is nothing to do with Brexit one way or the other. As to whether high immigration holds up the economy, that's where you've got to strike the right balance, because we do need some immigration. We particularly want skilled people. We want shortages coped with in areas like care homes and so on. But we have to accept that if we have net immigration at this sort of level, then even if we built more houses, we wouldn't be able to cope with it. You know, that the increase in the population will be so fast that infrastructure, particularly housing, but also roads and GPs and so on, wouldn't be able to cope.
When you look back at some of the promises that have been made in this area, David Cameron saying he wants to bring the levels of net migration down to tens of thousands, despite your belief that these numbers need to come down, those kind of promises were always either dishonest or fanciful, weren't they? No,
I mean, and it did come down. I mean, with David Cameron,
but not to tens of thousands. That was clearly unachievable.
It wasn't clearly unachievable. It came down from about 250,000 odd when the Conservative coalition government came to power in 2010, and within a couple of years we had it down to about 160,000. So you can actually change the system to bring it down. But when you have, as we have today, more than 3 million people of working age who are not unemployed, they're not actively seeking work, but are living on benefits for various reasons. There's been a huge increase in mental health problems since the pandemic. Then that is clearly the area where you need to work hard to make sure that you don't need to continually bring in people from overseas.
But if there's a specific promise on numbers, no one should believe it, should they? Because all the specific promises on numbers have been broken.
Well, there isn't a specific promise on numbers now.
Oh, but there might be at the manifesto.
Well, I frankly doubt whether there will be a specific number attached. But what I think everyone would agree is that at 600,000, that's too high. You've got to bear down on it, and you've got to explain how you're going to do it. And there's two sides of that coin. There's stopping people exploiting the system, but there's also saying, where are you going to get the care workers, the tech workers, and so on? When you look at the sectors of the economy that are getting the most visas, those are where you need to attract people and retain them.
Damien Green, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Now, the Mayor of London has told this programme the capital needs more migrants to help fill huge gaps in the workforce. Speaking on our Ways to Change the World podcast, Sadiq Khan said a sensible migration policy is needed to boost growth and investment.
I've no hesitation at all in saying we need more migrants in London. And let me explain why. So I'm not equivocating. It's really important for me to say this why. Park the social benefits to our city from migration. park the cultural benefits to our city from migration. I've spent this morning with some of our city's leading business people who create jobs, wealth and prosperity. They've got a skills shortage and a labour shortage, right? We've got a pipeline of training up Londoners for future-proof jobs. I'm now in charge of the adult education budget. Even if every single Londoner who's currently not working was to be trained up to do these jobs, we still have massive number of vacancies, record numbers of vacancies in the health sector, in social care sector, in hospitality, in tech, and so forth.
Mayor of London. Well, joining me now is the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper, you heard Sadiq Khan there saying that London needs more migration to deal with record labour shortages. Is he wrong?
Good evening, Cathy. Well, look, what we've seen in these figures is a 120% increase in work visas over just the last 2 to 3 years, at the same time as these increasing skills shortages. So that system really isn't working. There's other figures out today around asylum backlogs getting worse and so on. And of course, the net migration figures being twice the level that the ministers had been aiming at.
And I'll come to all of that. I'll come to all that, but I want you to respond to Sadiq Khan's point.
I will do. Just to come to your point, I think the problem is that you've got this chaotic approach that the Conservative government's taken, and there's no plan and there's no grip on either immigration policy or the asylum system either. So what we need to do is have a proper plan to link the immigration system to the training, to the skills that we need. And we have set out 2 reforms to do so. One is to link the shortage occupation list, some of the areas that Sadiq was talking about, where there are shortages, that actually has to be linked to training, has to be linked to requirements to train in those sectors rather than the way the Conservatives approach it, which is just to shrug their shoulders so the shortages get worse. And then secondly, to get rid of the 20% unfair wage discount, which means in the current immigration system, there's actually an incentive for employers in these shortage occupations to recruit from abroad because they can pay 20% less than the going rate. Well, that's not fair. So we would make those 2 changes, and we think that is the best way to address the skills shortages that our economy has.
Let me pick up on that last change you were talking about, and barring companies from hiring foreign workers below the market rate. So are you prepared to put more money into social care so that employers could pay homegrown workers more?
So interestingly, social care actually doesn't benefit from the 20% discount at the moment. Engineering does, many other areas and occupations do, but social care doesn't, or at least the main social care recruitment doesn't, and that's because social care workers are already paid often on average below the minimum threshold for any recruitment for the shortage occupation list, which is around 21,000. And the NHS also isn't affected by the 20% discount because they have national pay scales. But there are a lot of occupations, a lot of jobs that do, particularly in IT, in engineering. You know, an engineer might be on average be a job that's paid 45,000, where the official going rate that the government applies is nearer 35,000. But actually employers can recruit at 28,000, way lower than the average pay. That is an incentive for those employers to recruit from abroad rather than do that training in engineering, tackling those crucial shortages that we've got here at home.
So clearly you want to curb immigration. You consider it too high at the moment. You say that the government's lost control. But if they'd had control to the extent they wanted, they'd have crashed the economy, wouldn't they? Do you agree with that?
So let's be very clear, immigration is important to our country. People have come here for generations to work in our public services, but also to found some of our greatest businesses and so on. That's going to continue.
Much immigration?
So that's going to continue to be really important to our country, so too are international students. But it's this significant increase in this short period of time that we've seen in work visas that we do think is an issue because it reflects this failure to tackle skills shortages.
Right. So how, if you're criticising the government, you know, I understand that you're the opposition, but how significant would you like to see immigration being in future? Give us a sense of a ballpark figure.
Well, we've said we think that the net migration figures should come down. I actually expect they will come down because it does include Ukraine and Hong Kong in these unusually high figures as well. But I think
below 500,000 net migration,
I only
roughly.
heard the end of your interview with Damien Green, Cathy, and I think you were saying to him, why should anybody believe any targets that the government puts forward? And that's exactly the right question, because we have had the net migration target that David Cameron set that totally failed. Then we've had a series of targets since from Boris Johnson. It's a bit unclear. Rishi Sunak seems to be changing his targets. That's unclear.
But he agrees with you that he doesn't want to do a specific target anymore, but he has given a broad direction of travel. That's all I'm asking for from you. I mean, are we talking broadly below 500,000, which is what the Prime Minister said?
So, again, I said I think that net migration should come down, and
by tens of thousands,
well,
though.
you've got the figures around Hong Kong and Ukraine as well. The reason, though, that we're not setting a specific target is because I think all the targets that we've had have been totally discredited, and it's better to set out what are the practical policies that we would do. And
but
so,
as
well as those changes, there's one other
that?
area. There's one other area that we would, as also that's really important, is the scale of investment we would put into additional training of new doctors, new nurses. Health and social care is one of the biggest recruitment areas from overseas at the moment. That will continue to be important, but it shouldn't be a situation where we're always having to turn overseas rather than have proper training for our NHS here at home. And Wes Streeting set out a major programme to train doctors and nurses of the future here in the UK.
I get that you've set out policies, you've been very clear on that tonight, but would you say to people thinking about voting Labour at the next election or not, you know, would you say to them that net migration should come down by a lot? A little, a lot? I mean, just give us a ballpark.
So, as I've said, I think net migration figures should come down, but I think
not maybe by a lot.
I am being really clear about setting out the policies that I think will deliver change. And I think given the really discredited history we've had, you know, Boris Johnson set a target, and since then, I think the numbers are now double what the target was. You've also got on asylum, Rishi Sunak said he'd clear the backlog. In fact, the asylum backlog has gone up. He said he'd increase asylum decisions. Instead, asylum decisions have gone down. So there is this level of chaos, lack of proper planning, lack of proper policies. We're setting out, whether it's the immigration policies I've just set out for you or some fast-track policies on asylum that we would introduce, far more sensible, we think, to just set out the practical measures that we would do that we believe would make a difference and have a sensible policy for everyone, rather than, you know, this kind of gap between rhetoric and reality that just makes the system worse. Immigration's important for Britain, but that's why it has to be properly controlled and managed so the system is fair.
Yvette Cooper, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Well, let's go over to Aisha in Leeds. Aisha.
Thanks, Cathy. Now let's take a deeper look at some of the numbers in today's release of official statistics on a different aspect of migration. The government's pledge to reduce the backlog of asylum seekers awaiting a decision. Our communities editor, Darshna Soni, has been analysing some of the data. Darshna.
Well, the Conservatives have made a number of promises, Aisha, not just on migration, but also on asylum during their 13 years in power. And it's not just about bringing down net migration, as we've just been hearing, people mainly here for study or work. Rishi Sunak has also pledged to tackle the asylum backlog. That's the number of people applying for refugee status in this country who are waiting to find out if they can stay. And today we got new data on how well he's doing. And it shows that the number of people waiting for an asylum decision is the highest it's been since comparable records began in 2010. So here's the data. Let's look at the last 13 years. Now, what this graph shows is that the numbers stay under 50,000 all the way until 2020, but then it shoots up to 100,000, and now, if you take a look, it's at 173,000. This backlog matters. We've been documenting the impact on those whose lives are in limbo while they wait for a decision. They're often stuck in hotels, so there's obviously a cost to the taxpayer. It impacts local communities and it impacts the mental health of the asylum seekers themselves. So, what's the government doing about it? Well, earlier this month on Channel 4 News, you may remember that we looked at the backlog in asylum claims, or rather, the two backlogs. Because here's the thing, Rishi Sunak has pledged that by the end of December this year, he will clear what he calls the legacy policy backlog. That's only cases lodged before the end of June last year. Now, they're represented by all of the orange dots here. If you take a look, 1 dot for every 10,000 cases. So it stands at just below 89,000 at the end of last December. But, as we revealed, there's a second backlog of cases lodged before the Prime Minister's cut-off date of June. They're represented by the grey dots, and that figure stands at 43,500. So, how's the Prime Minister doing in clearing this backlog of claims? Well, figures out today show that this backlog has shrunk, but not by much, only slightly. It's down by around 10,000, so it now stands at just under 79,000 cases. But what about all the people who were stuck in this shadow backlog, the backlog that Rishi Sunak didn't pledge to clear? Well, figures out today show that these have risen by the same amount as that backlog has fallen. So what it means is that this has grown by around 10,000 cases from up now to 54,500. It means that if the current rate of progress was continuing for the rest of this year, the Home Office wouldn't hit Rishi Sunak's pledge to clear any backlog by the end of this year. Now, the Home Office tonight insisted that they are on track to clear the backlog, saying that they're making more decisions. They also told us they're doubling the number of asylum case workers. But just a final thought. The Prime Minister has also pledged to end dangerous boat crossings across the Channel. Today's data showed that just under 46,000 people made their way to the UK in that way. And we know that 90% of them will make asylum claims. So that means, Aisha, that the majority of them are also likely to end up in the asylum backlog.
Thank you very much, Dash. Thank you.